joining us now, Pat Buchanan, one of our absolute favorites, who wrote a terrific piece on the Trump visit to Mexico, and the word conquistador was used in the title, which, of course, I clicked on that and, like, only Pat Buchanan. I read it, by the way, on WorldNet Daily, which we love as well. Pat, great to talk to you, my friend. How are you?
Doing fine, Laura. How are you?
So the Matador, that's Spain, but we'll use it anyway.
That's Cortez. He
exactly.
burned all his ships and headed on into what is Mexico City.
Oh my gosh, we got a lot to talk about. But first, let's talk about that visit to Mexico and how it sent the media into an absolute tailspin because they weren't prepared for it. It was the last thing they expected, and anyway, you touched on this, and I want your reflection for our listeners, and then we'll move on to a different topic.
Sure, when I heard him talking about it, you sit down and you think of that. Look, it entailed real risks. Him going down there, he could get into a set-to with the president of Mexico, or the president of Mexico could lecture him, and how's he going to respond? And so he took a risk. And given his situation, I think it was wise to take a risk. And he went down there, and I thought he came off admirably, very presidential. Even the Mexican folks who were disgusted with their own president for not standing up to him and talking to him and denouncing him, even they said he came off as firm and presidential. And the fact that Jorge Ramos is going up the wall suggested it was a great success. And I think what happened was the American media, they were caught flat-footed. And many were saying, this is going to be a disaster. Why is he going down there? And he pulled it off. So I think what makes it a success is the stunning character of how well he did. Secondarily, he was very presidential, and a lot of folks have been concerned by the temperament charge and wondering whether he's got more than one gear, being up there on that podium and that platform. And I think in every way it was a triumph. I mean, I've seen some anti-Trump people say it was the best day of his campaign here in America.
Yeah, I saw those same comments from Krauthammer and so forth. He did go on to Arizona. And look, you work for Nixon and Reagan, and over the years you've seen so many ebbs and flows in presidential campaigns. But he did this, statesman-like visit to Mexico. But then he goes to Arizona, and he does a big immigration speech, and it's a rally of 10 or 15,000 people. And if you were advising him, would you have advised him to do that following that Mexico trip, or could that have been done differently?
Well, it could have been done differently, but, the question is whether you advise someone to do something that he doesn't really feel he wants to do or really is not in him. He wanted to, after having his statesman-like trip, he wanted to go home and say, in effect, stand up there like a victor and and do his rally speech, and it was quite a rally speech. And so I would not have, I wouldn't, you don't want to keep telling a candidate to do what he feels comfortable doing and what he feels best about. Look, as I wrote in that column, he has rolled the dice here. He has said, look, I'm going to be Donald Trump, and this is what I believe, and I'm going to rally and tell my folks this, and I am going to give speeches which lay out the facts, but I'm not going to give up this most effective weapon I've got in the campaign, and I think people understand it when you're up there speaking at a rally speech, but in any event, I'm going to do it. And so I understand it, and my hope is that it's working, and I think we're going to have to wait, but I would guess that it is to a degree working because he has risen, he's crept up a little in the polls, and it's going to be interesting to see where we are on the Tuesday after Labor Day.
And Pat, again, the concern about Trump from moderate voters. I think he already has the immigration enforcement crowd with him. They're
right.
all with him. But for the moderate voters, we do, I think, want more Hispanics in the Republican Party. He needs to reassure people, right, that he's going to fight for them relentlessly. It's not going to be the big donors. It's not going to be the lobbyists. We're not going to be dancing to George Soros's tune. But he's going to be fighting for them day in and day out. And I think that message, if that keeps coming through, I think that's a winner. The only problem, of course, is that as substantive as he has been and as specific as he has been on both trade, immigration, his economic message, as you wrote about, Pat, his foreign policy speech. I mean, he has given a series of compelling and to some, I understand, provocative, but specific speeches about major problems facing the country, the media will just not talk about the substance of what he's arguing, instead dwelling on the tweets or the temperament or he's mean or but the actual specifics of what he's talking about, you got to admire that because he's laying it all on the line. He's laying it all out there.
Well, that's what, I remember one speech he gave where, I watched it on TV and then I said, I'm going to go in and extract what the text of it said about I think it was his economic policy and lay it out. And it was excellent. All the way down the line, it was principled, it was populist, it was consistent with conservatism, and there's no question about it. But what you said before I just came on, I was listening about how the media, I've never seen a candidate who has a worse press than Trump has, and there's no question that the vast majority of the American people receive their information about Trump through filters which are basically deeply hostile to him. And so what comes to them and with the news about him is also all this opinion, which suggests to an awful lot of those folks you're talking about, moderate and middle class, that raises their apprehensions. And that's why you use the word reassurance. And that's why the meeting in Mexico City was so important, was that he was up there acting exactly as you would expect a president to act.
Well, and a president who doesn't go overseas apologizing for America, as Obama did, but a president who goes to a foreign country and says, this is what America needs, this is what we expect, we respect you as an ally, we value you as an ally, but this is what we need to do for our own people.
Exactly. He was gracious, and they avoided, obviously, who's going to pay for the wall, which you don't do. When Nixon goes to China, he doesn't say, let me bring up the Korean War now. And so when Trump did it, I think he did it exactly right. But then he stated those 5 points very firmly and strongly. At the same time, he's complimenting the president. He's complimenting the country and its people and their achievements and a desire to get along. But saying, in effect, we're coming to the table and we're dealing with friends and we've got differences and we're going to have to work them out and here's our side of the case. It was just admirably done.
And I think, contrary to what we heard from Paul Manafort early on in this campaign, that they were going to run a regional campaign, that it was going to be more focusing on the swing states, don't you get the sense, Pat, that Donald Trump's decided he's going for the national campaign now?
I agree with you 100%.
Which is what Reagan did.
Well, exactly. And the fact that he's moving, my concern is, you see the Rasmussen poll, and it may be a bit of an outlier, that has him move 1 point ahead of Hillary. And he's been moving clearly, slowly gaining in the last 10 days. And she's been slipping because every time you look at her, people are saying, please, Lord, don't put this on me, for the next 4 years. And so I think there's a real opportunity there, but then you listen to these TV shows and you get the state-by-state polls, and they haven't closed quite as well. So, but I agree with you. I think he's trying to, get a huge wave of the American people to just go in and say, look, we want change. We've got doubts about this guy, but we cannot go with the same thing for the next 4 years, so that they all come down, as they did come down after that debate. In a sense, Reagan was similar. A lot of people were, I was pushing Ford for vice president to reassure the country to do anything to get Reagan in there. And Reagan gave him the reassurance in the debate, and suddenly the wave broke, and he wins by 10 points.
How important is the debate?
I think all three of them. I think they're very important. And again, my view of this election is, this country does not want to elect Hillary Rodham Clinton. There's a core of the Democratic Party that do, even Bernie's people don't, and Trump and Cruz and their people don't. And the question mark is over Trump. And so they're saying, we'd like to elect him if we can see that we're not making a terrible mistake for the country. If he's acceptable, he can really be a president. And that was what was so good about Mexico City, was the message it sent to all these people who have the doubts in their minds. And I think that's what he has to do in this debate.
I think it's reassurance. Reassurance
is exactly right.
Yeah, that word I think is critical. And people, well, let me read this. There's a piece in the Wall Street Journal. They love you as much as they love me in the Wall Street Journal, Pat. I think there are about two people that really despise other than Trump. You and I are right at the top of the list. So it's called Trump's Fortress America, and it's all about the shrinking GOP coalition. More Hispanics, more immigrants, more Asians turning away from the Republicans, turning away from Trump. And they say that the New Yorker's plan would do economic harm. He's talking about immigration. By slashing the workforce for construction, agriculture, restaurants, travel, and other services. There aren't enough Americans to fill those jobs now, so many of these services will vanish or become more expensive. This is why Mr. Trump employs H-2B visa holders at his Mar-a-Lago resort. And then goes on about the bad economics and so forth. And voters care more about immigration, and Mrs. Clinton's ethics and electorate's overwhelming desire for change are keeping the race competitive. But if Mr. Trump loses, his vision of an America that fears more than welcomes immigrants will be a large part of the reason.
Well, if Mr. Trump loses, I think one of the reasons certainly will be the abandonment of him by people who promised to support him, and Republicans. Leadership class and what they've been doing. But I hope we don't get into an argument over who's responsible for the loss yet before we've lost, and I don't think you have yet. And as I wrote in that column, I still think there's a chance, and you look at the movement that's going on, that would be the best thing, frankly, for these Republicans, the fence-sitters and the ones that are slipping over into Hillary's camp or dropping off their resumes, is basically polls showing Trump going into the lead by 2 or 3 points. I think you will find a sudden silence on the part of his critics and maybe a trend to move toward him openly and say, well, in a two-person race, I prefer Donald Trump, and we're going to get behind him. So, but there's no question about it. I mean, Trump came with a set of issues that won this nomination that is hemlock to the boys in Washington. That's economic patriotism. That's, not globalism, but America first. It is staying out of these foreign wars. It is having our allies pay part of the freight for our protecting them for 60 and 65 years. It is getting, look at Ike and Nixon and Reagan and Bush one. They all went and talked to the Soviets. They all went and talked to these leaders. They didn't just call them thugs from a distance.
Well, and I think that, again, the sense of decline as China's rise is unabashed and bold. People get a sense of this. Finally, Pat, we're almost out of time, but should Trump go big in ads, television ads that tell stories about America, the American experience? Should he be taking out more ads?
Well, I think he's going to have to take out ads, certainly in these swing states. I think the contrast of what he offers America and what Hillary offers America, he should be doing them in the swing states. But, I really haven't sat down. That's not my area of the campaign. Sit down and do these things in which states, and that's chosen by the folks that are looking at those polls.
Absolutely. Pat Buchanan, we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. We'll close out this hour. Don't go away.